Hello, everyone. Welcome to MICE, the Massachusetts Independent Comics Expo. I'm MICE co-director, Shelley Paroline, and this is the cover design workshop. Before we get started, I want to take a minute to thank our sponsors of this program, Lesley University College of Art and Design, which has hosted MICE since its start in 2010. Lesley Art and Design recognizes the value of exposing students, alumni, future students, and the broader community to the varied world of contemporary comics, and considers MICE to be a critical partner in expanding the importance of visual narratives and the role of artists and designers in society. And thanks to all of our arts advocates. These are major contributors who help sustain MICE and allow the show to grow year after year. Hello, everyone. Welcome to MICE. MICE is produced by the Boston Comics Arts Festival, a 501c3 charitable organization that funds comics arts festivals, individual artists, programs for the greater Boston community. If you like what we're doing here, please consider making a donation today. You can just hit the donate button at the bottom of this session. Also at the bottom of the screen, you'll see a button labeled Ask a Question. Please use that button to ask or vote up any questions that you might have throughout the session. And you can also take a look at the chat on the right-hand side of the screen. You can use that feature in order to say hello right now. We'd love to see like where you are today, what your age is. That'd be so wonderful. Finally, we'll also be streaming this panel to our Facebook page. That's facebook.com at the bottom of the session. MICEXPO. And that is for our audience members who would like to use the automatic closed captioning function that Facebook Live offers. Now I'd like to introduce you to our instructor today, Sophie Goldstein. She is an award-winning graphic novelist, illustrator, and comics instructor living in Tulsa, Oklahoma, where she is also the Tulsa Artist Fellow. Sophie is a core faculty member for graphic novels and comics at Lesley University's low residency creative writing MFA program. Her most recent book is An Embarrassment of Witches with co-author Jen Jordan, and is now out from Top Shelf. Thank you, Sophie, and please take it away.
All right. Well, I'm very pleased to be here today. Just before I get started, I just wanted to put in a plug for the Lesley MFA graphic novels and comics genre, which is housed under their low residency MFA in creative writing program, where I am an instructor. So it's more of like a intense one-on-one mentorship program where, you ideally you come in with maybe a big project or things that you want to work on. And then I would as your mentor or guide you through that process to becoming a better cartoonist. So if you are interested in that at all, they will put some links in the feed, and you're also welcome to ask questions that I can talk about after the show, or you can get in touch with me. My email is redinkradio@gmail.com. Okay, now that we've dispersed with that, I'm going to start talking about comics covers. So let's go to the flat part. So first of all, okay. So, I think when a lot of people are starting out making mini comics, which is what I'm going to be talking about today, is doing mini comics covers, I think the first thing a lot of people think of is I'm just going to do a really beautiful drawing, which is a fine choice. And here's a primo example of it. These are the Pug Davis comics from Rebecca Sugar of Steven Universe fame. They're these beautiful painted comics, and it's kind of an adventure comic with a gay romance subplot. And the covers are very reminiscent of kind of adventure comics of a certain period. So I think that they really, even though the interior art isn't black and white, the covers are a really great complement to the theme and worked really well. So, I mean, if you can draw like Rebecca Sugar, this is a great way to go. But not all of us, including myself, are quite so lucky. I just want to show you a couple other outstandingly beautiful covers that I think are really lovely. Another way to go if you're trying to do a really eye-catching cover is to have a lot of really entrancing detail. And I think this Ritual 3 Vile Decay by Malachi Ward, which came out in 2014, is a really great example. In addition to having a really eye-catching level of detail and a great title, and I think if you have a really great title, it's great to highlight that on your cover because sometimes it can just be really intriguing. In addition to that, there's also a really lovely kind of linen texture on the paper on this cover, and I'm going to be talking more about that later on. So there's also a really great back cover texture here. So it just makes it a lovely thing to pick up and hold. Another comic that is just beautiful to look upon, this is Frontier, which I don't have listed in my notes, but I know this is by Sam Alden. This came out through the Frontier series. So this is actually a wraparound cover. So that is one image across both the front and back, which I think is something artists love to do, but it's always good to keep in mind that it's always good to keep in mind that when someone is going to be encountering your cover, they're usually going to just be doing it with the front cover image, especially because we live in a digital world. And a lot of times you'll just be looking at an image on a website. So you're not going to get the full wraparound effect. So if you do end up doing something like this, just make sure that you don't put anything really important on the back that people need to see, because they may not get to see that until they're physically looking at the book. But so this also has a really great level of texture here that kind of draws you to it. Another way to go, if you're kind of, if you're not just going away from just like having a beautiful drawing on the cover, is to have a beautiful drawing and a really nice design. So I think that this is not only has a really eye-catching image with some great texture in the hair, but then there's also this like spot circle right here with some additional like leaf detail. And it just like really draws you into this image. The paper is kind of a newsprint, and there's no difference between, maybe a slight weight difference between the cover stock and the interior stock. But I think that having this like title here and the beautiful image kind of like is eye-catching. Back cover though could probably use a little bit of work. So there's some real estate here that is not being used to best effect. Sorry, I will be saying some critiques about people's cover designs, but these are all from my personal collections, so I can recommend all of these comics. So, okay. Another really great eye-catching kind of designy cover is Everything Nice by Toulouse Lafontaine. This was published in 2017. So I think there's a couple nice things. First of all, it's on red paper, which is nice. And then you have this kind of like contrast between the texture and the flower here, and then the strong blacks of the design. And then you also have a white print on the red cover, which I think is kind of unusual. And as someone who is interested in bookmaking, really drew my eye because it's not something you see a lot of. So I think this is a good designy cover that's also pretty simple. A couple more that I'm going to pull up here. My Dead Mother by Clara Jetsmark from 2016. So this is a great example. It's a very simple design, but I think like it has, My Dead Mother is such a great title. And I distinctly remember actually like walking through the convention and seeing that title, which is, big, very readable, and being drawn over to pick it up. And so it's that title combined with the really bright orange color. And then when you get up closer and you get to see like this little detailed image here, it's just a really simple but beautiful eye-catching design. So I think that that's a really great one. So those are some like kind of obvious little covers where either it's a really eye-catching design or it's a really beautiful drawing. But I want to kind of broaden it out. All right, but before I do that, I'm getting a little ahead of myself. One sec. One of the things about having all these physical books is I have them all lined up, so I'm going to have to walk away periodically to pick things up. All right, so just before I move on, I just wanted to highlight what I think is a really great example of this approach to cover making, which is the Blammo series from Noah Van Sciver. So I think that if the series, it's interesting because you don't see a lot of series that have different sizes, but since this is a personal anthology series and not one book that he's anthologizing, he can have kind of like variations in sizes throughout, because the idea in the end isn't that it's all going to be collected into one volume. So that's something to keep in mind when you're making your own book designs. And then even though there's a different color scheme and different images on each of these books, it has a strong identity throughout because it has this like very distinctive blammo title text. And then, you know, he also has a very distinctive drawing style. So I think that even without that, you would be able to kind of like pull these together, and his name is consistently in the same place, almost forming a lovely little ribbon here. So it kind of creates an identity across the whole series. He also like goes very heavily in for density in his images. I think that this one, I think this might be the most recent blammo, is like a particularly great example where you have like very intense detail in the foliage. And then in addition to just having like visual detail, Noah also has like, there is no space left empty in his books. Like you get a comic on the back. I think all of his issues have back cover comics. And then additionally, you see material on the interior covers. So here he has his letters section. Let's see what he has on the back cover here. And here's another little comic. So I think that this is like a really great example. And when you pick up something like this, you really feel like you're getting your bang for your buck because there's just so much comics in it. So I think that having a very dense image that really draws people to want to pick it up and look at it can be a great way to go. All right. All right, so, but an important thing to note is that printing color is expensive. Anyone who's tried to do it will be aware that color printing is significantly more expensive than black and white. So for some people that might not be a thing that you can afford to do, which is fine. I just pulled a couple good black and white covers that I wanted to highlight to show you what I think are successful examples of cover design using black and white printing. So this is The Man That Dances in the Meadow by Sam Alden. It came out in 2013. I think it's also, you know, I've been talking about detail and texture. This has great texture in here. And it's kind of like a digital texture that I think is really intriguing. And it also has a great title. I Want to Know About the Man That Dances in the Meadow. So it's nice that it's very clearly delineated here, and it makes you kind of want to pick up this story. Also, it is a wraparound cover, or at least kind of a Rorschach cover. It's reflected, and there's this wonderful detail on the back of this like tiny figure. And I just love that. It's like a little Easter egg that's just delightful. Hold on, maybe. Yeah, it's just beautiful. So I think that's a great example. And even though it's not very complicated, but he does have like a little texture on the inside cover. So it's not just blank white paper, which I gotta say I'm never a huge fan of. Okay, another comic that's great black and white cover is Issue, I think that's how you pronounce that, Issue 1 by Robert Sergel. This is from 2008. So I think this cover has a really great use of negative space. You have all this detail here in the corner of the house, and then you have this big black sky image with a very like slight speckling of stars. On the back cover, it looks like synapses, which kind of relates to the content, and then you get some more additional information about the price and things like that. So I think this is a very high design cover that I think really draws you to it. So this is a great approach to black and white. It reads really, really well. All right, this is Message from the Moon by Daryl Seichik. I hope I'm pronouncing her name right. It's black and white on the front, and then you see it's a black sky and white background, which is reversed on the back, which is, I think, kind of like fun little surprise. I think that she also makes a really excellent use of a circle motif here. The title is Message from the Moon, and she has like the moon over the word moon, which is just, I think, like makes me happy on a design level. And then there's also on the title page, there's the moon as well. And you see she has a little texture here on the inside. It looks like this book was trimmed down, but there's still some white space here that was not trimmed, which I'm not super nuts about. So if you're going to trim, if you want a full bleed, make sure you have enough of a bleed beyond the border that when you trim it down, you're not going to get these kinds of white lines. That's a little detail that people is just going to like make your book even better if you pay attention to it. Additionally, she used a corner rounder here. So corner rounders, they're kind of hard. I haven't found a contemporary one in an art store recently that wasn't for like single pieces of paper. I have a corner rounder that I ordered off eBay for like $70, and it's actually just have it here because I would just use it. I think it's from the 50s. It's hella old. This thing is going to outlive me and find another life with another cartoonist someday. So it's great. It's just a nice little detail, and I think it kind of works with the whole round. You have this round image of the moon, and then the softness of the corners. It's just a really lovely little detail. Okay, going in a different direction. This is Hotline by Iris Yan. This is a minimalist cover, and it's a story, or it's an autobiographical stories about her experiences working on a suicide hotline. So I think that there's something about the visual emptiness that really works with the content. And then I think that it's actually a really great cover design. I think that having this big white space with this tiny detail of this, like in this cute little image that's like, it's cute, but there's also, I mean, there's a little bit of intrigue there about with the information, with the title. There's a contrast between the title and the image that I think really draws you to want to read this comic, which is an excellent comic, by the way, and I highly recommend it. All right, a slightly different approach to black and white. This is a Julia Grafera comic called Too Dark to See. This is from 2011. So this is actually a two-color silk screen. So the paper is black, and then there's this gray silk screened image, and then the white title and her name here. Sorry, you can see my camera keeps like refocusing. All right, and this is what the back looks like. You have the price and her press logo. So actually, the camera is showing up this design of the figure even better than it looks in person. Normally, when you're designing a cover, you don't want the values in your cover, the color values, which is like the level of lightness and darkness, to be too close together, because then it makes it really difficult to read. But here, the fact that this image is nearly the same value as the black background really works with the title. So it's kind of like almost like a visual pun. So even this is all black and white, like, you know, it's silkscreen, like you can silkscreen in any color, but she made a very conscious choice to work in the black white color values, and I think it works really well here. All right, so another thing about black and white is that there is a certain aesthetic to black and white. So I think this is the Real Rap series by Beatrix Erkowitz. This was published from 2012 to 2013. This is part of the Oily Comics, the sadly defunct Oily Comics publishing house. And they did bunches of series of comics that were like little foldy comics like this, just on printer paper. And they're each were priced at $1. So I think that there's some, it's like, I mean, for lack of a better word, it's punk. There's always something very punk about black and white comics, and you can really lean into that if that is something that works with your style, because it signals things to a certain reader. It's not, you know, part of it is a thing of necessity. It's very cheap to print this way, but it also communicates a certain kind of worldview and aesthetic that will appeal to a certain kind of reader. So I just wanted to show this little series, and then I have some other examples that kind of fit into this. So kind of the king of this is John Porcellino, who does the King Cat series. This is King Cat number 75, about his cat Maisie. And if you ever want to just cry a lot, if you're not already sick of crying in 2020, I recommend reading this book. So John Porcellino is kind of like a self-publishing icon in the indie comic circles. And part of his whole, and it extends to his whole aesthetic. Like he has this very stripped down, simple, poetic style, and he prints in black and white. This is a little bit more upscale than the oily comics just because it has this like heavy cover stock, which makes it a little bit more durable. But it, you know, it's a black and white comic, and it's I don't remember the price. It's priced $5, so which is still pretty much on a lower end. But he also, you know, you might not pay $5 for a comic like this from someone who doesn't have the kind of like track record that he has, but you would from him. So he's really earned it. Sorry about this camera. Okay, moving on. So another person who falls into this punk category who I want to highlight is Liz Suburbia. So let's see. Let's start with these. So this is Liz Suburbia's Cyanide Milkshake series. I have issues 2 through 8. Apparently issue 1 is like lost to the universe. So these are really great. As you can see, it's half legal size. So, you know, most of you are probably used to letter size paper, which is your typical typing paper. There's also a size of paper called legal. And so this is the legal size, which is kind of a little bit more square, a little bit more manga than your standard publishing format. So there's kind of an identity across the different issues that especially comes in later on, where you see this, she has this little logo here. And then of course the Cyanide Milkshake title appears, but it's different on every issue. But you know, she has a very distinctive style that I think makes these all feel visually connected. And then of course they're all the same size, which makes it very easy for her to publish a collection of her comics later on, which she did, and which you can purchase. And I highly recommend it if you can. So these comics are pretty inexpensive. I think the first couple issues were $1 each. And then the last issues were maybe $3, keeping up with, you know, the times and inflation. So I think that if you wanted to make work in this kind of format, if you like have, if this like works with your work, then you want to price it at a rate that's lower. And there's like, and it can be good to have a cheaper product because more people are likely to take a chance on something that's cheaper than a very expensively produced comic. So it can help you, especially when you're starting out. So, and I think it's important to note that the covers, there's no like different cover stock here. It's all printer paper. And she says in multiple points in her like letter to the editor, not letter to the editor, but her letter section that she has at the front of each book, that these are drawn on printer paper with Sharpie. So being cheap and accessible is a big part of her personal brand. So I highly, highly recommend these comics, and this is a great way to publish as well. She also, and I think this is an interesting thing to note. So this is her main Cyanide Milkshake series. And then these are the one-shots that she's done that are kind of just standalone comics. And you'll note that these are half legal, these are half letter. And I think that helps create like a separate identity for these comics in a very subtle little way. So even though these comics are hella punk, there's also really nice design going on here. All right, let me take these back. grab a new stack. All right, so kind of punk adjacent, if you will, is Julia Grofera's comics. So these are just a whole big chunk of her mini comics that she's done over the years. So these are also black and white comics, but she has taken the additional step of printing them on colored paper. So that's a really easy way to add visual interest to your black and white comics without adding a lot of cost, is just to use colored paper. And she uses, this is a text stock, so there isn't even a cover stock here, and it's the same paper throughout. There's also, I would note that even though this, the camera's kind of making it a little bit easier to see, but some of these darker colors don't read as well as printing on the lighter colors. So that's just something to be aware of if you choose to print on colored paper. And then I also want to, so she does have kind of a great way of drawing an identity across these comics through the kind of way she designs her covers. So each of her covers features is wraparound, and it has a close-up image. So here it's a rotting carcass, and here it's a lute. And then you have an octopus. Well, this is actually not a close-up because it's a giant octopus attacking a tiny boat. But here you get back into the close-ups. You have some dandelions or something, and a snake in a pelvis. I mean, who doesn't love that? And then a fig branch. So there's a strong identity across this series, but it's also pretty cheap to produce. And each of these is priced at $5, which makes them really reasonable for someone browsing to pick up. But she's also developed a very intense fan base, so I don't think that she has to work too hard to sell her comics, because she's so effing talented, as are all these people I'm going to talk about today. Okay, so another way to add, moving on from black and white and that little dash of color, we have silk screening. So silk screening is another way to add visual interest to your covers. It's a printmaking process. I'm not going to explain all the details of it, except that you're using screens and pulling ink across them to create an image. So this is a 2-color silk screen cover. And yes, you could totally do this with running off a color print at your local Kinko's, which doesn't exist anymore. I am aware of that. But this adds silk screening. Also, there's a physical texture to silk screening that makes it just really much more appealing. Because one of the things that you want to think about as a creator making mini comics is how mini comics are different than traditional books, because traditional books are mass produced. Mini comics are made pretty individually. So you want to think how can I make this distinctive? How can I make people feel that a person made this? And I think that that's an important thing to consider with mini comics, because I think that's what draws a lot of people to want to buy them. And here, this was someone made this, someone pulled this image, silk screened it. Another thing that's nice is he did a black and white print on the inside cover. So he ran this black and white print on one side and then did the silk screen on the other, and it just adds a nice little a little bit of visual interest there that I think is really appealing. Okay, another silk screen that I want to talk about is Of the Monstrous Pictures of Whales. This is by Luke Healy. This is a 3-color silk screen on colored paper. So the color of the paper is this blue color down here. And then I also think and this is a wraparound cover. And it's a pretty simple image, but it's very nice. It also has that nice texture that you get with silk screening. And then I really like how he has these end papers. So the end papers are this pattern of black and white pattern of whales printed on blue paper. and it's just inserted here into the comic before the comic, and it just gives it a little bit more of an upscale feel. So it's a very small detail that really adds a lot. And as you can see, it was printed. It looks like there's a little bit of blank space here, but it was definitely trimmed on the top and bottom, which just makes it feel even more sophisticated. And he did a perfect binding here, which is an extra little nice detail. There we go, you can kind of see that. So it was glued together instead of being stapled. So it kind of gives this whole mini comic a more upscale feel than just having staples. All right, so the next comic I want to talk about, this is also a silk screen. I believe this is by John Chad, who you just saw a workshop from. Very excellent cartoonist, wonderful book designer. This is The Adventure Unfolds. This was something he made for Adventure Time that was kind of like commissioned by them for San Diego Comic-Con in 2012. So this is a 5-color silk screen, which is insane and something you'd never find me doing. But I think there's a lot of nice details here I just wanted to print out. So the title is on the band here, The Adventure Unfolds. And I think this is nice because the title really relates to the interior content. I know this is not necessarily a cover thing, but this is a really cool comic and I found it and I just want to share it with you all. So this is how this comic works, is there's this, so here's the pages and then this is pasted in here and the comic kind of, the adventure literally unfolds as you're reading the comic. So here and here, and then you get this big page here. So this is just like a really wonderful, very clever design, a beautiful comic. And I think that he kind of gives the person the instructions of how to read it in the title, which is just very elegant. All right, last silk screen cover that I'm going to show you guys is the Mimi and the Wolves series by Alabaster. So these are, I have the 3 issues of the series here. They're each, come on camera. They're each a 2-color silk screen. And as you can see, there's a really strong identity across this series. Like they each have this triangular design with the axe and then her name here, but each of them is like different enough to really create a lot of visual interest. So I think that that's, and you know, even though there's a different font for each of the titles, it's still very easy to see that this is a series. These are staple bound. There's also little drawings on the back of each one, which is nice. These are staple bound. The first issue though has it's a double fold cover. This is an important detail to think about if you have a thick mini comic that you're making. If you have a cover stock and you don't do 2 folds instead of 1 fold, your cover is going to try and like open all the time. So this makes it like stay closed much more cleanly. And it's just a nice little detail to add here. And then also you have room to add like a spine if you have enough pages in your comic. Another little detail that I wanted to point out to y'all is in this second issue, she has a color insert. So the end papers, I guess, is 1 sheet of color printing, which is a really nice add to an otherwise black and white comic. So here she has the cast of characters and then a map. And then let's see in the back, it's she has some nice little drawings here that are in color. So, you know, like having 1 sheet of color art in your comic is going to be a lot cheaper than having an entire color comic. So that can be a really great add to your designs. All right, next up. All right, so we kind of covered silk screening. So now I wanted to talk about reso printing. Reso printing kind of had a moment, might be still having a moment in the last, I don't know, 5 years. So reso printing is another printing process. Okay, I'm not going to go like too fully into that. Oh my God, it's already 3:37. I have so much more, you guys. All right, I'm going to speed this up a little bit. All right, so these are all reso printing comics. Reso is a process where instead of like having the CMYK, which is cyan, magenta, yellow, and black, which is kind of a regular traditional printing, you have a printer that you can put in specific drums of ink. So these two comics were printed with blue ink. This comic is printed with hot pink and blue ink. And then this next comic from Marnie Galloway is orange and green ink. So the nice thing about this is that it's a lot cheaper to print a reso book than it is to print a full color book. So you can have a color comic, and it can just be an extra level of appeal to your reader. So this one's blue on a pink paper, which I think is really nice. This is Cardam Linear. All right. All right, another thing I wanted to talk about was using interesting materials for your book. So here's Imperium by Semberlidis. I don't know how to pronounce that, but this paper stock is a kind of like a speckled recycled paper, and it has a lot of texture on it, and it's used throughout the comic. He doesn't have, oh, that's a porn. He doesn't have a lot of like spot blacks in his comics. So having this kind of textured paper really adds a lot visually to the comic that otherwise might feel very empty. Here's Gin and Jam #1. So this is this cover is a color print on yellow cardstock paper. And then there's a title page, which is a black and white print on blue paper. And then the interior pages are on pink paper. And I just think that makes it immensely visually appealing, and it's very cheap to print, but it's very snazzy. So I highly recommend that. Another way to go with it, you can get metallic cardstock. This is two-color, this Carpe Diem by Ali Schwade. It's a two-color silk screen on a metallic blue cardstock. You can kind of see on the interior here. And then the interior pages are risographed blue and red, which really works well with the cover. So having something shiny will definitely bring the people to your table. I know I order all my paper through paperandmore.com. So that's one site I recommend, but there's probably a ton that have really interesting cardstocks. So this is Cream 3 by Carl Antonowitz. This is a really interesting cover design. So here you have, this is cardboard, and then he used a stencil and spray paint to put the title on it. And I think that this just picking this up, you get a very clear idea about like what kind of comic you're getting into. And it's just very unusual and kind of like crazy. And then the comic is like a vertical comic. So I think using unusual materials can be a great way to go. This comic, Run With Your Demons by Isabella Rotman, is great. It's printed on a textured brown paper, but it also has a custom, what do you call that? On the spine. So you actually have to like open this and open it to get inside the comic, which really works with the theme and tone of the comic. So that can be a really great way to go if that works with what you're doing. All right, another material that I don't see people using too much is vellum. This is Ghost Rabbit by Dakota McFadzean and Vivisectionary by Kate LaCour. Each of these have a vellum part of their cover here. And I think that this is really lovely. So you see here on Ghost Rabbit, it has a nice reveal because you have the house here, and then underneath this is a two-color silkscreen on brown paper, you see the destroyed house. So this is like a really great use of vellum. I will say vellum is extremely delicate material, so which if it gets moist can curl or warp really easily. So use it with caution. I also really love Kate LaCour's here. There's a really nice lineup between the scalpel and the image behind it, which is really lovely. So I also want to note that Dakota used this, what we've called hide the hardware binding technique. So this is actually a stapled book. There's staples here and here, but then the cover, the top part of the cover is actually folded around the back and glued to this piece of paper that's been stapled in. So it looks like it's not a staple bound book, but it is in fact a staple bound book, which is kind of like a nice little cheat. So that's another thing to think about with your books. Okay. The last book that I want to pull up just for the interesting materials is, this is Noel Freibert. This is Weird number 6. This is a 2-color silk screen on pink cardstock with the addition of this like red thread that's been sewn in with a sewing machine. And then the title is actually pasted on here with a Band-Aid. I will say this is like a very unpleasant looking cover, which is appropriate because the contents are also very dark and unpleasant. And I think he's made a great book where the cover really fits with the interior material. It even has like this really off-putting grainy texture. So it's horrific to hold, horrific to read. Okay. Another way to go about this is to actually print texture onto your books. So here are 2 Sam Alden books. This is Backyard and Household. And here I have Dear Amanda by Kathy Johnson. So this is actually printed on a regular smooth cardstock. But as you can see here, you can actually like see the texture of the paper that he scanned with the original image. So even though it's not on a textured paper, it still has the look and feel of texture. And you can see the interior, what the actual stock looks like. It's just smooth white. And then the interior, the paper for the guts is off-white, which is really nice. And then for Household, this looks like it was probably printed in a print shop. It's a perfect bound book. But this is another case where it has, a printed texture on the cover, just on a regular white cardstock paper. And then even the interior papers, it's a little bit hard to see on this camera, but there's a texture here that's been printed, and he must have scanned it, and then it's not been like fully, the texture of the paper has not been fully removed. So even though the paper itself is smooth, you still get that feeling of texture from looking at it, which is really nice. And then this is a black and white print, but here's another instance where you have all this printed texture on here. This just adds a level of visual interest. I also think that it's interesting that she has the staples on the front, and then it's been given a face trim here, which if you're going to do your staples there, you just want to make sure that your comics are pretty far away from the spine, because this type of stapling tends to like suck up the center, as you can see, because you can't open it flat. So that's just something to keep in mind, but I think you definitely get there's an added aesthetic feel from having these staples there. All right, so another thing I wanted to talk about were just like little additions that you can do to your covers to add visual interest. So here are some different covers. All of these covers have actual like drawn color on them. So here is Sex Fantasy by Sophia Foster Domino. It's a really wonderful series. This is a black and white print, but then she's colored in the sex here with blue ink, and fantasy is written out by hand. So that's a very like fast and cheap way to just add a secondary color to your cover. This is another Julia Graffer book. And here she you see the front and back. It's printed on blue paper, but she's colored in this skull here with a highlighter. So that just kind of like adds another like little visual interest to the cover. So this is Hypoxia by Eleanor Ritchie. It actually has a die cut in here, which is another thing I'm about to talk about. But she's added a complimentary hot pink highlight on the uniform of this diver, and the hot pink kind of complements the pink color on the secondary page that you can glimpse through the die cut. So adding those sorts of like color can be a great way to just give your cover a little bit more punch without adding a lot of cost or even time. All right, another way to do that is with stickers. So this is Glamora 2 by Betsy Swordlick and Panina Gall. It's just a fun, like goofy comic, but they added some stars here, and they're shiny, which is fun. And then this is by Lala Albert. This is Alien Invasion Volume 2. This is just a pink paper. There's nothing printed on it, but she added, this is a sticker that's been printed out and then pasted on the front here. And I will say, like, this is going to be a lot cheaper than printing a bunch of color covers, because she could have put like 8 of these up on one sheet of printer paper, one sheet of sticker printer paper, and printed them out, and now she has 8 covers. So this can be another effective way to add color and visual interest to your comic. And of course, there's also a textural difference. This is smooth and more reflective, and then this is the matte paper. So stickers, don't underestimate them. Another thing that you can do for your covers is gilding. This is the Inflated Head Zone by Zach Hazard Valpin. So this is actually a book cover that comes off, and underneath, I don't know why you would hide this. This is like by far more exciting to me. Is this silver gilded cover. So you found a printer probably who you can run off a bunch of these and then just, and then bound the comics himself, is what I'm theorizing. So it's a full wraparound cover, and it's just like so delightful. I definitely was entranced by this when I saw it in person at the show. Here's another one. All of these 2 examples are from printers. Like, you'd have to go to a print shop to do this. So this is Lacuna and Aftermath by Evan Dahm. And it's a color image, but then the title has a silver gilding on it, which just adds a little bit of shine and excitement to it. But you don't have to go through a printer to do this. Another way of doing it is with silk screening. Sorry for the curse word, but this is Holy Shit. It's a comic anthology. Let's see if I have the full list. By Sean Knickerbocker, Dakota McFadzean, Moody, and Amelia Honorato from 2011. This is a beautiful design for a book. So not only do you have this silk screen, like obviously this is supposed to replicate the look of a Bible. So you have this hide the hardware cover. Again, these are it's been stapled, and then the cover has been wrapped around and glued to the back sheet here. There's a reading ribbon that's been glued into the spine. It's a little bit hard to see, but the edges have been painted gold, just like you would have on a Bible. And the interior stock is off-white. Oops, sorry, so many dicks. This is a really great cover design, and you get that gilding effect without having to like pay someone to print 500 of it. So going even like little more hand feeling, this is My Every Single Thought by Porn Mucha. And this is actually, so this is a black and white print on cardstock, and then the single and these lips are drawn in with a paint pen. So each of these is hand drawn, and it's just, I just like really love it. It's got this wonderful texture to it. It has that like hand made feeling that is added to a comic that otherwise is incredibly simple. You know, it's just a staple bound comic, black and white art, and then this off-white cardstock cover. But I think that having this hand-drawn title with the ink pen just really levels it up and adds visual interest. So a very clever use of that. All right. So I'm definitely going to go over, by the way. So are there any questions that have come in yet?
Yes, we do have a few questions. I don't know if you want to keep going or if you want to answer a couple.
Give me like 2 questions and then I'll keep going.
All right, so the one that has the most upvotes currently is, do you have any suggestions for cover designs for comics that have longer titles, 8 words plus?
Okay. Well, I guess longer titles. That's definitely tough. I think that probably if you have a title that's like 8 words plus, it's probably, I'm going to hope it's a really great title. So you might go for something where most of the cover image is the title text, and you really want to choose like a really great, eye-catching but readable is really important font to do that. And then just go with a more like designy approach to your cover, rather than preferencing like a beautiful drawing the way you might if you had like a 1 or 2 word cover. But I would definitely like, if you have a title that's like 8+ words, you want to be like really 120% on that title. Because I will say, like, you're going to be tweeting it, it's going to be on the internet, you're going to be saying it a lot. And my latest book is called An Embarrassment of Witches, so I know what I'm talking about. It's just going to be a little awkward. So you just want to be really sure that it's a good title and you can't go with something shorter. Yeah, you just think about that. Maybe crowd surf it with some of your friends.
Fair enough. All right, we'll do another. That previous question was from Erica. Thanks, Erica. This one's from Ed. It used to be that covers had to have titles and intrigue towards the top of the page because of how they're placed and overlapped on racks. Still something to consider?
Probably, and if you're doing a mini comic, probably not. I mean, I think that would be relevant. Everybody hears the questions, right? When you're asking the question, I don't have to rephrase it. Okay, I'm just going to go ahead and assume that's the case. Okay, so yeah, with putting titles at the top of the cover. So I think if you're doing like a Marvel or DC comic where it's going to get distribution to comic book stores and be like in racks, then that would be a consideration. But with mini comics, you're mostly going to just be selling them. I mean, this has been my experience at shows, or they're going to be going through distros where people are looking at comics like in little images on a web page. And I just don't think that there's going to be too many instances where people are only seeing like the top third of your image. So that's not something that you would need to worry about quite as much, is my take on that.
Awesome, thank you. Do you want to jump back in and then we can maybe grab a couple questions at the end?
Yeah, that sounds great.
Awesome.
All right, so the next part of making comic covers I'm going to talk about is size. Size matters when it comes to mini comics. So here is like some different, so these are like tend to be in the smaller range, except this is a Ben Passmore comic. So this is, I'm sorry for, there's cursing in here, but it's not mine, so it's fine. Look Who's Fucking Miserable by Ben Passmore. This is a hot dog style fold comic. So this is like a regular, letter size sheet that's been folded hot dog style as opposed to hamburger style, which is the sophisticated terminology that I'm using here. So I really love Ben Passmore's comics. I won't say this is like my favorite comic cover he's ever done, but I think he makes pretty good use of the vertical size of this image to have some like really great vertical orientation here. So I think with some good thinking, you could do something really interesting with this like size of book, and it really stands out because people do not make a lot of books in this shape. So that can be an interesting thing to do. So let's start with this. Turdy Needs Work. This is a humor comic, a bunch of like 2-panel gags by Steve Wolfhard. I love this comic so much and have had it for so long that I had to tape it because it started to rip here because I read it so much. But I think one of the really things that I love about little comics is that they, especially for humor, I think they can work really, really well. You can print multiples of them up on a single page. So they're incredibly cheap to produce, and you can sell them for like $1. And it just, you know, it's nice to have something of lower cost on your table that someone can buy if they're not familiar with your work and they don't want to go in on your like $10 comic, then they can get a little like taste of what you're offering here. So this is just a black and white print on a color cardstock, and then it's stapled here. And it's great. And it also kind of works with the comic itself because it's about this tiny character, Turdy, who keeps getting these jobs. And of course it's comical because he just like can't actually do anything. He's just too tiny. I love this comic so much. Okay, so another one that I'm not going to open because it's incredibly inappropriate. This is a comic that I made. It's called Jimmy Corrigan, Sexiest Boy on Earth. It is a play on Tijuana Bibles. So Tijuana Bibles are a historical form of comics. They were made, they were all this size, and they were popular in the 1920s and 1960s, and they were obscene parodies of popular newspaper strips like Blondie or Popeye or Dick Tracy. And they had the characters from those comics like having graphic sex, and they were sold on the black market. I feel like is making it sound more sophisticated than it is, but people would make them and sell them. So I did the same thing with Jimmy Corrigan, which is part of the joke, and that's why it's also like the size of a Tijuana Bible. So yeah, you'll just have to imagine what's in there because you're not going to see it today. Okay, and then this is the Sex Fantasy series. I already showed you, this is a second printing of this comic that I showed you earlier that she hand colored. This is a risographed edition. But even though each of these covers is very distinctive and there's a different title, font, and drawing for each one, they're easily identified across the whole series by their size. I also think at this size, there's a real feeling of intimacy when you hold a book of this size. And these are very intense, emotional comics. And I think that there's something about their the squareness and the size that really works well. And each comic is a single panel per page, which also works well because, you know, if your panels are really tiny, they're going to be hard to read, but a single panel per page works incredibly well at this size. Another thing that I wanted to note about this comic in particular that I think is just a brilliant aspect of its design is, so this is a autobiographical story about a vacation with her partner and in a kind of like a difficult moment in their relationship. And then she actually has like a photo from that trip that's on the inside cover. So and the guts of the comic are actually bisecting it. So I don't know if you can kind of see that here. But this is the two of them, and then they're literally visually divided by the guts of the comic. And I just think it's just like such wonderful, brilliant design that adds this like emotional component that is like instantly readable. And I just was really blown away by that design detail when I picked up this comic. So, and just a really great series overall. All right, now my personal favorite, die cuts. All right, so die cuts are literal, you know, cutting holes and shapes in your comic. They are very cheap because you yourself are doing the labor, and they can add a lot of visual interest. So let's see. This is Steak and Cake by David Mack. This is a hand die cut on brown craft paper, and it kind of has a nice little reveal to the title. And this title is on a hot pink paper, and then the guts are white. So, I mean, this is a little comic. I don't remember how expensive it is, but I can't imagine it was too pricey. It's hard to price small comics very high just because like people do think like big more expensive, small cheaper. But I think it is a very sophisticated design for a small gag comic. This is The Fisher Queen by Laura Salgarolo. Laura Salgarolo. I hope I'm doing that right. So it has this great like fish die cut in the cover over the image of this character here. And it really relates to the title. It's great. I do kind of wish that there was a color up here so you would see this shape fully filled in when it's closed. But I think it's a really like nice little add to this cover design. This is Non-Binary by Melanie Gilman. There's a die cut. It's die cut here. And then there's a great reveal. Once you open the cover, you see Melanie as a character drawing in there. So this is all printed on one sheet. So this is what the sheet looks like before it's been folded up. But it's only printed on one side. So even though you get the feeling of like multiple layers here, it's one sheet, which makes it cheaper to print. So that's a really great design. And then of course, you know, non-binary, and you get this feeling of like two-ness and division that kind of like works with and against the title. So just a really brilliant, simple design. This is Incision by Kate LaCour from 2015. There is a literal cut here, and then you have the hand here, and then this great like textured painting on the inside. One of the things I will note is if you are doing die cuts, you'll see there's a piece of tape here where this got ripped. That is because this cover stock is a little bit flimsy. If you're doing a die cut and you want your comic to last more than the length of one convention, make sure that you're doing it on a heavy stock paper, very important. So that's a couple of these die cuts. I have some more for you. All right, this is Mesmer, once again by John Chad. This is great. So this is like the title here. It's been die cuts in squares over this orange end paper here. This is a black and white print on blue paper. I think he did something incredibly clever here. So there's kind of a gray gradient that's printed here. So this is the actual color of this paper. It's pretty bright. But then you can see these little diamond shapes, they really pop because he used that gradient to push down the color of the paper overall. So it almost looks like these little diamond shapes. It looks like they're silk screened, even though it's just kind of a trick because he made the overall color seem darker. So this is like a really clever but cheap cover design that I think is really eye-catching, and it's a really great comic. This is Sophie Yano's In Situ #2. I think this is a really interesting and elegant design. So this is like a color cardstock, and then over this white cover with the title. And there's something very like sophisticated and European about this. And I can't quite put my finger on it. Maybe it's the font here. But I think that it's very simple, but it really adds just a little bit of pizzazz that wouldn't be there if it had all just been one cover. All right, so we also have Beast Mother by Eleanor Davis. So this is a really great die cut cover. So you have the face here, and it's been the die cut, and then over the secondary character's face, and then there's another opening, and you get this kind of like secondary cover, which is just has a simple black and white. I can't tell if this is a print or a silk screen, but of a bird. And then finally you get into the comic here. So this is really great. This cover is really telling a story, which is something that you want your covers to do as much as possible. You want them to relate to the content. You want them to tell a story and even add like additional elements for your viewer. So, the outside of your book is part of your book. It's an important thing to think about. So this is a silk screen, a 2-color silk screen on this medium brown cardstock. And then wrap it up. Okay, all right. Unfortunately, I have more to show you guys, but since I misjudged the time, I think it's, is there time for questions?
We have like one more question that actually didn't get answered, so we can do that one. So the last question here is, do you have books on different mini comic binding techniques that you would recommend?
Oh,
maybe resources, anything like that?
Yeah. I don't like I don't can't think of them off the top of my head. That would have been a really great thing for me to prepare for. I will say that if you YouTube is a really wonderful resource for bookbinding techniques. When I was teaching myself how to do like traditional sewn books, that was something that I looked at. So I would try looking up YouTube, like if there's a books binding technique that you like, just to see. One of the things I wanted to show you was something like this is a Luke Howard book. This is a do-si-do book. So there's actually 2 books that are back to back here. So if that's something you're interested in and you're like, I want to know how to do a do-si-do book, and you just look up do-si-do on YouTube, you're going to find a video that's going to be much more thorough and instructive than almost any print book that you can get. Sorry, print books. So that's, I think, one of the things. As long as you can find that name for that bookbinding technique, you can track down how to do it.
Awesome, thank you so much. So I think I have one last question for you. Could you show your last favorite, maybe something you didn't get to right now, and then we'll close it out.
Okay. Well, I think one of the things I wanted to talk about is my own mini comic that I made. And I was part of so I wanted to show you my House of Women series. So I now do books mainly with publishers, so I haven't been doing as much mini comics, but this was like the last big mini comic series that I did before this book was collected by Fangraphix. So each of these covers, you can see there's a cohesive design across all 3 volumes, 1, 2, 3 here. This is actually, so there's a gilding effect, but it's not because of silk screening or hand inked or anything like that. It's actually gold paper. It's a little bit hard to tell, but this is a gold paper that has black and white print on it. So that's much cheaper than trying to print gold on black paper. So this has all been printed with black, and then the title is white, but it says it's printed on the gold paper. You get the gold effect. It's staple bound. So there's staples here and here. And then this spine is actually like been glued on after the fact. And then the whole book got a face trim. And I have that corner rounder that I showed you to round these corners here. So each of these covers has a double die cut. So it has this window, and then there's a secondary cover that's kind of on an off-white cardstock with this one has the characters, and then there's a window through that to a color page. This is the only full color print in the book. So that's issue 1, issue 2. You have one of the characters with the aliens that are native to the planet, and then there's another little image that you can glimpse through here. This kind of lines up neatly right here. And then you get a full color image here. And the same thing with the 3rd book. So this has like a mirroring effect that I was doing with the layering, where you see Sarai, who's kind of our villainess of the story, and then you open that, and then you get another shot of her looking at 2 of the other characters. So I feel pretty proud of these book designs, and each of them had a little image on the back. So, but even though these books were a lot labor intensive to produce, they were very cheap to make. So I think that if you were really, one of the things I want to say is if you're very smart and put a lot of effort into thinking about your cover design, it's possible for you to make a beautiful book that's also very affordable for you to make, just by adding a little bit of thought ahead of time and not just going with maybe your instinct, which is to like pull a pretty image from your book and slap it on the cover. I guess one of the final thoughts I want to leave with is people put months or weeks, months, years into doing a cover design, and then they just slap on a cover last minute before the show. Don't do that. Make sure that you put a lot of thought into your cover, because not only is that the first and maybe the only thing a lot of people are going to see, but your cover it's the doorway to your book, and you should think of it as part of the story that you're telling to people. So pay attention to it. Put aside the time to make it worthwhile.
That's fantastic. Thank you, Sophie.
Yeah, thanks everyone.
So thanks everyone for coming. And if you're inspired by Sophie's mini comic collection, I know I was, you can share some of your favorite cover designs on Twitter with @MassMice. And if you're missing mini comics right now, please check out our 32 mini grant winners on our website. To order Sophie's books from Paper Asylum, a local independent comic shop, please find the links to our website by clicking the link at the bottom of your screen. That's right now. We're also putting up links to Sophie's socials. The session is a part of the Month of Mice, a month of free comics programs, including panel discussions and workshops. If you like this workshop, you can check out the Clip Studio Paint demo. That's next Sunday at 7 p.m. And for a full list of sessions, you can visit micexpo.org or click on that button again down there and check out our fundraising raffle, where you could win cool prizes like a Faber-Castell brush set or a Wacom One tablet. Okay, so great. Thank you all. We'll see you on Twitter, and until next time, bye-bye.